All right, everyone. This afternoon, I have with me former Lieutenant General Leo Kosinski. Welcome to the
Thank
hot
you.
seat. Leo, you served as the Director of Logistics with the J4, the Joint Chief, the Joint Staff at the Pentagon, and in that role you were able to integrate logistics planning and execution in support of global operations, supporting the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in those advisory responsibilities. And I couldn't be more excited to have you here, so talk to us a little bit about your experience
Yeah.
and how you came to this
Sure.
additive journey with
Great.
us
No, it's
today.
a pleasure to be here today.
Yes.
So yeah, I'll share that. I started off in the Air Force 32 years ago. Graduated from the Air Force Academy, went to grad school for engineering, and then became a pilot. And so really my scope or foray into logistics, I mean, I was a consumer, I had some understanding, but it really wasn't until later in my career, when I was a one-star general officer, first assignment as the director of logistics at AFRICOM. And so Africa, huge continent,
Yeah.
54 countries,
Yeah.
challenging enough for logistics, but then you add on COVID and supply chain.
So you were there during
I
that
was there
time.
during that time. So it was hard enough, and then you add that on. And then
Wow.
fast forward a few years later, I get selected or nominated to be the director for logistics for the Joint Staff. And I'm not a career logistician. I've learned a lot along the way and still studying and learning as I go. And so in preparation for that, I did a lot of reading and research that you would do for prepare for anything. And we talked, prior to this starting about Freedom's Forge by Arthur Herman.
Yes, like what kinds of things, what kind of books informed
Yeah.
your reality during that time?
So I think those books, there's a history of Army logistics in World War II. You can get free download on PDF and 300 pages of all those really tell the story about how logistics and sustainment and defense industrial base won the war. So there's a lot of lessons learned and a lot of parallels with what's going on now, rising power in Asia and
Yes.
challenge defense industrial base, and what do we do? There are some differences. I won't go through all, but one of the things that kind of kept me up at night was when you go back to World War II and you talk about Ford Motor Company that would start making fighter planes, or you talk about Maytag appliances that would start making spare parts. To some extent, we could do that today. When I start thinking about our exquisite technology like F-35s and aircraft carriers, no matter how optimistic or imaginative, we just can't do that, even the Tesla plant. But so I get to the point where about several years, or maybe 5 years ago, I came to MilAM and asked me to speak, and so my staff prepared me and ready to talk. But looking at the technology, spending time here really opened up that possibility that with advanced manufacturing, with forward deployed micro factories, with that kind of capability, we can do what we need to. We just have to rethink how we would reestablish that defense industrial base and that the competitive advantage, not just here, but overseas with our allies and partners.
I'm glad you said that. And I remember the National Defense Industrial Strategy in 2024 recommended, and the subsequent one that just came out, I guess, a week or so ago, it also mentions that we really do need to look at co-production. We need to continue to frame deterrence in particular ways. Deterrence comes through our logistics. It comes through the ability to make things, and as well as people, right? So I do think some of the calculus in our country, we still have the ability to do anything. I think we have some of the most sophisticated defense industrial base that exists in the world. At the same time, it's specialized.
Yes.
And it's, as you just said, and the equipment's not everywhere like it once was, because it can't be. And you only need so many of those explosive big giant things, right? And then you have to maintain them over peacetime. So talk to me about the calculus and how you think about that.
So if you go back through history, I mean, all major wars were, won by brave soldiers and sailors and airmen, but really came down to national production.
Yes.
I mean, when it comes down, and so it's not. So this is what we're talking about isn't something new, but it is something that we've forgotten. After every major war, even after the end of the Cold War, we have what's called a peace dividend.
Yes.
And so that's a good thing. A nation kind of sacrifices treasure, blood. It's people during a war, so when you win, you want to give that back. The problem is we've given too much back.
Yes.
And logistics and sustainment, you're right, like we don't know, I think of it as like oxygen. I mean, it's something you don't appreciate until you don't have enough, and then it's almost too late. And so going back to lessons learned from World War II, it's not like right when the war started, we were ready to go. We actually did things in place, policy and other things, years before that allowed us. And even then, it still took a few years to really get the capacity we needed to win.
And we've given up most of the manufacturing production for various reasons. I think they were profit-driven reasons and cheap labor markets in other parts of the world. At the same time, we've also had, globalism and a lot of global cooperation for the last 80 years, right? And for example, even at this conference, I sat with a group from the UK, the folks from the Danish Defense Department are here, Dutch, the Dutch Navy is here, and on, right? And the Korean Ministry of National Defense was supposed to come also, but had some challenges. So it's truly a global society, and America has been in the great position to unite these folks. And I think that when we think about co-production and being able to make things in far-flung places, far-flung from our nation, but where our fleets are located, can you talk about, as a J4, how would you position where we are with Additive today into the future?
Sure. And I think even I'll start with the allies and partners. So there's been an initiative for a few years now. It's continued by the current administration called Regional Sustainment Framework. And you may be familiar with that, but it's having leveraging capacity for repair, for production, and different regions, Europe, Asia, and all that, which again seems like a new concept, but if you go back during the Cold War, we had all that capability to do depot level maintenance for ships and planes in Europe and Asia. So advanced manufacturing, the challenge, I was thinking about this, that my first exposure really to advanced manufacturing was about over 10 years ago, maybe 11 years ago. I was a wing commander, so in charge at a McChord field at Joint Base Lewis McChord, Tacoma, Washington. And we're in that role. We had about 51 Boeing C-17 big cargo planes. So we had thousands of maintainers and other experts that were fixing that. They had just bought like a pretty new additive manufacturing or 3D printer. And
it was 10 years ago?
10 years ago. So,
I'm imagining what that must have looked like.
And I'll tell you,
but
here's, we've made progress, but here's like the challenge. So when they made it on a C-17, when you go into it's a big plane, you have a co-pilot, pilot. And on the left side and right side, there are these integrated interphone control units. So it's a control unit that has little knobs and frequencies to do. One of the problems with pilots, and you have your iPad that'll drop on that'll break it, or you'll have your seatbelt that will damage it, and those units are not cheap, about $30,000 a year, but the problem is that the supply chain takes forever to get them. So to get quick to the point, that maintenance folks there put together a plexiglass piece that would go over it and protect that. And so easy solution, $10 to save millions of dollars and all that. But at that time, engineers and bureaucracy said no, because possibly when you look through the plexiglass, maybe between like 57 and 56 degrees, you might not be able to see a number that you put in there, which I think you just move your head and see it. But there's all reasons to say no as opposed to say yes. So some of those legacy challenges are still there. But
you just described the whole procurement system.
And hopefully in 10 years it's improved, but really where it needs to be is like warfighting. So the great position I was in the joint staff, and there's lots of great staffs and people that work in the government and industry, but that's really the key role. It's the nexus of all the services, all the acquisition requirements, future capabilities, and ultimately you're the voice of the joint warfighter. I mean, you have, wherever they are in harm's way, you want them to be most capable on things. And this is where, still even at a great conference today, and there's lots of great speaking and all that, but just being able to translate this great technology to like operational use cases and make it like just common use. I imagine in a perfect world, before that supply officer orders something through DLA, option one is like, can I just print this here on location, and getting that in our habit pattern, because that's what's needed, especially in a high-end conflict where you.
So what you're describing is exactly what I was hoping, which is there are certain things that you could just do. There are certain things, especially on an aircraft with people on it, that you can just, you got to get some approvals to do. And in additive, we're also seeing a separation between those who are printing unmanned vehicles, USVs, drones, whatever, and those that are printing things that are going to go on a manned system. I mean, and even very hypersonic space flight, those kinds of things. You have to be very careful. You have to have the highest standard for those things. So we're seeing the difference already playing out in terms of decision structure. And for me, I do feel like the way additive makes things differently than traditional, not just differently, but it has an entire digital footprint that you can trace, which is different than the way we have been doing it. Like you have material traceability, you have all these things. So it seems to me like we're just in the throes of creating a new system of trust that we just not there yet. We're halfway there, and we've got the last half is not the low-hanging fruit. The last half is the hard stuff, and it needs people in your role, in the former role you had, to like help us make sense of it and make some decisions.
Well, this is where history can repeat itself. If you go back to World War II, you had young officers or other enlisted that were in charge of things that could make decisions. They could take risks. Like they were in charge of programs.
That's it.
Because you had to be. And so there's the commander for U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, Admiral Samuel Paparo, has made a comment recently about commanders need to eat risk. And so
he gets it.
He does. And so this is where,
really does.
How do you do this in practice? General Wilsbach was the same when I worked for him when he was the Pacific Air Forces commander. Now he's the chief of staff about, to do agile combat employment, to exercise the way we do, people might get hurt. I mean, you have to kind of, you have to take some risk, because if you don't take risks now, you take a lot in the future. So, for example, in some kind of combat place, I may be at a deployed location where I need to print a part for an advanced fighter aircraft that normally would require 10,000 landings and takeoffs and all this. But if I don't get this part on there, and there's a missile coming in, my probability of survival is 0. And if that thing gets me 1 takeoff or 10 or 20, and how do you delegate that risk and that practice to someone there on the ground that could make that part, to get it out of harm's way, keep it in the fight, realizing there's that risk, but right now that risk is not delegated at that level.
Yes.
And it would be in wartime, but the problem is you want to practice and get reps and sets before that happens. So.
Yes, in fact, so one thing I've learned in this role for the last 4 years is that each of the services does things differently, okay, duh, but I'm going to say this out loud in front of people, that I've seen the Marines go more down lower in the command structure to authorize those kinds of decisions. I see the Army playing with that as well. The Navy certainly has a completely different command structure, but they have, at the ship level, they're making those choices. And the Air Force is the last man standing firm on the old processes, because there's a lot at stake when a failure occurs. But I think each of them are approaching it differently. Is there some guidance that you might have for, our leadership at the Joint Chief level that could say, how can we standardize this or create a better, and I don't even want to take authority away from anybody, but this technology is different. It has a different set of parameters. We need it desperately to do the things that you and I have discussed about. Is there a way, is there a top-down, bottom-up approach that you think could work?
Yeah, I think definitely. I like the way top-down and bottom-up, because the problem is you get general officers and senior policy officials that produce a memo that says do this, and that sounds good, but it still doesn't allow commanders to eat that risk. That risk is still down throughout the bureaucracy. So how do you change that culture to be able to do that? I mean, there's some efforts when I was in the Pentagon, which are probably still ongoing, but if you have authority for some part or something for the Marine Corps, that's great, but does that work for the Navy or the Air Force? And we're still struggling with that, because if you have to kind of go through that hurdle every time, again, there could be some minuscule risk that it's different among services, but to be able to move fast, you should be able to adopt fast, especially if someone in one service goes through that. So I think some of those standards, the ability to push down that risk, and be able to articulate that the challenge is short-term risk is easy to see. If I approve this part and something happens, I'm going to be in trouble. But the accumulated risk, if we don't do this now, fast forward a few years from now, 5, 10, when we're in a conflict, is going to be huge, because we don't have that capabilities when our adversaries could. So it's, again, easy to say. I'm glad to help and give advice. I still help support wherever I can at the Pentagon. But those are great points. And hopefully I see light at the end of the tunnel with the current policies coming out to try to get, move fast, take risk that is needed in order to, calculate a risk. Again, with the biggest risk being that, we would not be able to win or be able to do what we need to do against a peer adversary.
That is the biggest risk. One last question.
Sure.
So another thing we've seen happening, you talked about the policy guidance that we've seen. You talked about, I think, at the White House level, but I've also seen some policy guidance recently at the congressional level. So congressional intent, the National Defense Authorization Act has a provision that essentially bans the use of printers, 3D printers from adversarial nations. And the implication of that is the DoD cannot use them anymore, and we've got a year to comply. Yeah. Still a great capability that those printers have, undoubtedly, and you paid for it, but the threat of having those printers in the ecosystem is significant enough that we have to find a replacement. Yeah. And so when you think about our soldiers and our children learning on those ecosystems, you're embedding that bias for a long period of time if you don't deal with it. So like you said, the accumulated effect of doing nothing cannot be borne. Yeah. It just cannot. So I'm honored to have you sitting here and teaching me about how you think about this. And I hope this isn't the last discussion we get to have, Leo. So thank you for being here.
No, thank you, and this has been great. Look forward to coming back. And but just for everyone out there, what advanced manufacturing is doing in the U.S. with our allies and partners, this equates to readiness, to capability, and directly to deterrence.
Yes.
Because adversaries see what our supply chains are like. They see those challenges, and if we can provide robust, resilient capacity and at scale, that then alters the decision calculus of our adversaries, saying maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not ever, because we're going to keep getting better at our capabilities.
I like that. Yeah. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not ever. Yeah. I'm going for not ever.
All right, me too.
Thank you again, Leo.
All right.
See you soon.
Thanks.